Good evening, class. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic. And that topic today is about rotation and anti-rotation and the necessity of it. Why is there a necessity? Because, well, simply put, it's been bastardized. Four things on here that we really want to talk about, guys, and that would be the focus on sagittal plane, which we'll get to in a second, the misappropriated athletic uses of rotation and anti-rotation, and the necessity for why you need to perform it properly for performance, and then the often forgotten or neglected aspects of core that do get missed because of this sagittal plane use. So, starting off here, with the sagittal plane, obviously, as we know, it's about flexion and extension, so essentially your crunches, your leg raises, that sort of stuff. The general bro knows that this is a good way to bring out your six-pack abs, but beyond that, there really isn't a ton of athletic performance basis. So if your baseline is, I can do 100 crunches, and that's going to make my deadlift better or my squat better, chances are it's not going to happen. So long story short, yeah, you can do it for aesthetics, but it's not really going to play a huge factor in improving your performance or anything inside the gym. Next, we're going to talk about the misappropriated athletic uses. So in a lot of situations, there's often a poor setup and execution for rotation or anti-rotation movements because they're a little bit more difficult to execute than that is used for this sagittal plane stuff. So simply put, a crunch, like you can kind of just set up and do that basis. But to do something like a power press properly, you have to have a baseline understanding of what you're trying to work and what you're trying to accomplish. So a lot of people generally set up with the band or resistance set behind them, so when they're hitting that end range, they are not at an optimal position in terms of length-tension relationship. So they're not exactly getting the full benefit of the exercise itself. At the same time, there's oftentimes a lot of poor execution movements. Again, we can talk about it in terms of the powerlift press. You can see a lot of people where they'll extend out and then with their arms, and then as they're returning, they're hitting a point where they're almost shrugging their traps, thinking that it should be more of a trap-based movement or like an entire front-to-back ratio of their core, but that's not necessarily the case. If it's an anti-rotation, you should feel it more so in your internal and external obliques and a little bit in your transverse abdominis, which we'll get to in a minute. So again, if the setup and use is incorrect, it's not really going to help. And then at the same time, seems to be a big use on twists in terms of like Russian twists and side bending, where you just kind of like take a plate in one side and then twist and rotate. But those don't really have a whole lot of benefit beyond the fact that stuff like your QL are lateral flexors. So yes, you might be getting some sort of felt stimulus for your core, but are you really working what you want to be working? So if your goal is to improve your athletic transference, again, for your deadlift, your squat, or your Oli lifts if you're doing something like a side bend or a twist really isn't going to help you out in those situations because it's mostly going to be working your QL. It might to a certain extent be working your internal external obliques if you're crunching down in that position just through like an isolation-based movement factor, but it's not really getting the best bang for your buck, which is why it leads us to performance necessity on why you want to be performing these activities properly. So obviously, if you're performing an activity better, the goal is going to be to make you faster, stronger, and better at what you're trying to do. Unless for whatever reason you want to be a poor performing athlete, bodybuilder, Olympic lifter, power lifter, whatever it be, then sure, stay shit. But if your goal is to become faster, stronger, and a more well-rounded athlete, then obviously it is a performance necessity. So there's 4 exercises that I've highlighted here. And essentially, you've got the 3-point plank, which again focuses on anti-rotation from a transverse plane. So in terms of like rotational factors, you're trying to keep your hips as square as possible, and then to progress that, you can make your hands go a little bit wider, feet a little bit closer together, and put a weight on your back. The powerlift press, like I've discussed earlier, that's also an anti-rotation, but that's more for like a transverse versus like frontal plane type of setup, where you're trying to be as stable as possible going in and out. There's not so much any flexion extension. You're not really laterally bending. There's no rotation whatsoever. And same with the bird dog, where that again is focusing on anti-rotation as well. So again, your transverse plane. Every single one of these that we talked about are working in the transverse plane, which is an often neglected realm in terms of training. People do twists and bends or iso holds with their side plank, which side plank is good, don't get me wrong, but it does become stagnant if your goal is for improving performance. At the same time, you want to have some sort of rotational work, and that's where stuff like a ball rotation comes into play, where you can actually focus on that entire TA, or your transverse abdominis, coming into play, bracing and rotating with you to work and have the internal and external obliques work to their full capacity. And at the same time, as you get harder, you can remove the ball and just have rotational work going on through your arms, keeping them fully locked out and moving through that manner, and then become a little bit more sport specific or athletic depending on your sport, and do things such as wood choppers, cable chops, or cable twists rather, and work from that position. Now, why is this so important? The rationale for this is simply because it's often forgotten or neglected core musculature, as I was saying. So your rectus abdominis, in my opinion, is usually overtrained or technically overused, because everybody knows the whole crunch, the whole leg raises, the whole sit-ups, just that general type of use, because it's simple. It's often neglected doing things to work your transverse abdominis or your obliques, like I've just kind of alluded to. So if your goal is to look better on stage, or to lift more weight, or to be a stronger, faster athlete, you do need to work on your transverse abdominis and your internal and external obliques. Again, even from a bodybuilder point of view, if this is underdeveloped or underused, you're going to look worse. It's simple as that. So if you're stronger, obviously it's going to lead to more muscle hypertrophy, and there's going to have a little bit more muscular size, so you'll look better on stage from that point of view. But at the same time, your other lifts, like your hack squats or your leg press, or even your squats or your deadlifts, if you're doing them as a bodybuilder, that's going to make them stronger. Obviously, as a powerlifter, you would want to work on these anti-rotation and rotational-based movements, and not just flexion extension, because of the simple fact that you do a lot of flexion extension through your movement patterns itself on a day-to-day basis. All right, guys, that's all I wanted to say on this point. I know the video title is kind of clickbaity, talking about the first or the only ab exercise you really need to do. As I hope you've kind of realized, there isn't really one exercise that you should be doing for your core. There's technically a ton that you should be doing. It's just way too much to cover in one video. The possibilities are really endless. But the main point I want to hammer home is, don't worry about just doing flexion extension. Don't worry about just developing your rectus abdominis. There is a lot more to it than that. The core travels from what could be argued to be essentially just below your throat to basically the start of your bum, front to back. So you do need to take that in consideration. We do go straight up, straight down, side to side, flex, side bending. So take that in consideration when you're doing your programming. I hope this video has helped and has been informative. All right, ladies and gents, stay strong.